I have been hearing about linen sheets for forever. So I finally made the switch with Quint, and let me tell you, I'm obsessed. Yes, it's Shelby, and these linen sheets have elevated the look of my bedroom, and I honestly don't know why I waited for so long. I'm a hot sleeper, especially now during these warmer months, and these sheets have been a game changer. Quint's sheets are light, breathable, and soft from day one, woven from 100% European flax. It's the perfect mix of relaxed and refined, and it just gets softer with every wash. And linen isn't their only game. Quint has ultra plush duvets, quilts, pillows, and shams too, featuring other premium fabrics like organic cotton, breezy bamboo, and skin-nourishing silk. My favorite part is that Quint only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. Level up your bedding with Quint. You'll feel the difference right away. Go to quince.com/SYTS for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/SYTS to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/SYTS. And welcome to Scare You to Sleep. I'm your host, Shelby Novak, and I'm here to read you an old bedtime story. This week I have for you a tale by Gaston Leroux, most known for his novel, The Phantom of the Opera. Unfortunately, Monsieur Leroux's stories haven't been printed in English very often. The copy, at least in modern times, the copy of his tales that I have was printed in the UK in 1980, and I paid a pretty good price for it. I think it was about $40 off of thrift books, but I so desperately wanted to read his work, and the cover is really great. By the way, that is a little bit pricey for thrift books if you're not familiar with thrift books. So tonight I wanted to read to you a tale that will quickly sound very familiar to many of you. And this is the, for now I'll say original, more gruesome and salacious version. But I'll talk more about that after the story so as not to spoil anything. I'll give a bit of the history behind this story, which is very, very fascinating. And as I've said, I couldn't find a copy, at least as of this recording, online. So you might hear in the narrative some sounds of pages turning and of me holding the book. I will try not to keep those in. I don't know if they would bother people. I know some people really enjoy those types of noises, or those types of sounds, but I will try to keep that down. This was originally published in French in 1924, titled La Femme au Collier de Velours, and then in English in 1929 in the publication Weird Tales, under its English title, The Woman with the Velvet Collar. You say that all the tales of Corsican vendettas are just the same old story, over again? Gobert, a retired sea captain, remarked to his friend, Captain Michel. Well, you're wrong. I know one story that is so terrible that it makes all the others seem mere child's play. It even sent a chill up my hardened spine. Yes? Michel was skeptical. His was the skepticism of a man who, believing himself to have known the most thrilling adventures, does not take stock in other men's tales. Yes, he went on. Another case of a couple bullets in the back, I suppose. But go ahead, let's hear it. We haven't anything better to do. With this last shot, he ordered another round of drinks, and the party of old sea dogs who gathered every evening in the Cafe of the Sea at Toulon to spin their yarns settled themselves to listen. First of all, Gobert began, my story hasn't anything to do with guns, and secondly, you've never heard of a Corsican vendetta like mine, unless, of course, you happen to have been at Bonifacio about 30 years ago, as I was. In that case, you would have had your fill of the story because the whole town was agog with it. He looked around inquiringly, but none of the men present had ever touched at Bonifacio during their many voyages. Well, I'm not surprised, Gobert went on. It's not a port of importance, but it is one of the most picturesque towns in Corsica. You've all seen it, probably on your way to the Orient. A lovely spot with its fortress, the turreted battlements, and the time-stained walls. The fortress juts out over the crags like an eagle's nest. Lay off the descriptions and give us the story, the others exclaimed impatiently. All right, here it is. I was in command of a small destroyer, forming part of the squadron escorting the Secretary of the Navy on a tour of inspection in Corsica. At that point, they were considering the fortification of several ports. In fact, they even thought for a while of turning Porto Vecchio, which is as large as Brest, into a regular naval base. The Secretary of the Navy went first to Calvi and Bastia, from where we returned to Ajaccio to wait for him while he crossed the island by train, passing by Visavona, where he was met with great ceremony by a delegation of bandits who had left the wilds of the interior that very morning to present their respects to him. The famous Bellicosia himself commanded the squad that fired the salute. The Secretary of the Navy was much impressed with his imposing bearing, his rifle, whose carved stock had a nick in it for every man he had killed, and his famous knife, the dagger, given to him by Edmond About, with the request never to leave it in a wound. There you are, the same old stories, Captain Michel interrupted peevishly. Just a lot of old wives' tales. You're right, old chap. These are just stories. But if you hold your horses, you'll hear something more important. We left Ajaccio and arrived in Bonifacio at night. The larger ships continued to Porto Vecchio, but I was among those detailed to escort the secretary ashore. It was a gala night, of course. A big dinner was followed by a grand reception at the town hall. Bonifacio, situated as it was opposite Magdalena, wanted fortifications, and its citizens had turned out in great style to make a good impression. They produced the best of everything they had: flowers, finery, and beautiful women. And you know how beautiful Corsican women can be. At dinner, there were some striking beauties, and I remarked about it enthusiastically to my neighbor, Pietro Santo, a charming fellow of a frank, good-natured appearance who was then town clerk. Wait until you have seen the woman with the velvet collar, he said seriously in an answer to my remark. Is she more beautiful than these? I said with a smile. Yes, he replied without smiling. Yes, she is more beautiful. But It is not the same kind of beauty. In the meantime, our conversation drifted to the customs of the country. My head was still ringing with all the brigand stories I had just been hearing from my comrades on their return from escorting the secretary to Visavona, and their account of the spectacular reception by Bellicosia had seemed to me like a scene from a musical comedy. I thought it rather polite on my part to doubt the dangerous character of these outlaws. After all, Corsica was as civilized as certain parts of France itself at that time. The custom of the vendetta, Santo explained to me after I had spoken, continues to be a part of code of honor here in the same way that dueling is with you. Your revenge accomplished, you automatically find yourself an outlaw. But what can be done about it? It's too bad, of course, but we have to put up with existing facts. I myself am an easygoing man. I was brought up in an antique dealer's shop, and I'm sorry to see how savage some of my compatriots still can be when their family honor, as they call it, is in danger. You surprise me, I exclaimed, pointing out to him the jolly, good-natured faces around the banqueting table. He shook his head. Don't trust them, he warned, and his face grew dark. A laugh changes very quickly to a diabolical grin on their lips. All these dark eyes are sparkling with frankness and merriment tonight. Tomorrow, they may flash black with thoughts of hate and revenge, and all those slender, delicate hands clasping each other in good fellowship never cease toying with hidden arms. I thought these customs had died out in the cities and only existed in the little villages of the interior, I said. The first husband of the lady with the velvet collar was Mayor of Bonifacio, sir. I did not understand the allusion and was on the verge of asking for an explanation of this somewhat enigmatical remark when I was stopped by a call for silence. The speeches were about to begin. At their conclusion, we withdrew to the drawing room, and it was there that I first saw the woman with the velvet collar. Nor did I need Pietro Santo to point her out to me. There was no mistaking that strange, funereal beauty and the velvet ribbon which circled the base of her neck, making a wide black strip against the whiteness of her skin. The velvet collar was worn very low at the rise of the shoulders and emphasized her long and slender neck. She carried her head very proudly, always holding it in a straight, upright position. Her face was classic in its beauty, but so pale that one would have believed it chiseled in marble, had it not been for two flashing eyes of strange brilliancy. As she passed through the room, they all bowed to her with lowered eyes, and I caught a general atmosphere of fear and instinctive recoil which roused my curiosity to full pitch. Her beautiful body was draped in black velvet as she came forward, slipping in and out of the crowd, with her proud head and tragically pale face. I had the impression of seeing the dignified ghost of some dead and martyred queen. When she had gone, I turned to my new friend and voiced my feelings about this uncanny woman. "There's nothing strange about that," he answered seriously. "She was guillotined." I looked at him in astonishment. "What do you mean?" I stammered. But he could not answer me immediately. The woman with the velvet band, having greeted the Secretary of the Navy, came down the room towards us, stopped and held out her hand to my friend. "Good evening, Pietro Santo," she said, and I noticed that her head never moved from its rigid position. He mumbled something and bowed, and she went on. All the eyes in the room were focused on her, and a deep silence had fallen. I noticed then that she was escorted by a handsome, well-built fellow about 30. His face had the fine profile often found on old Greek coins. These delicate features are frequently seen among the Corsicans, and sometimes give them a family resemblance with the great emperor. "He's her second husband," Pietro Santo whispered, noticing my gaze. The couple disappeared at this moment, and I was conscious of a sigh of relief rising throughout the room, while an old man in a corner crossed himself, muttering a prayer. "They never stay very long," Pietro Santo explained, "because they're not on very good terms with the present Mayor, Ascoli. Angeluccia, that is her name, has always been proud and ambitious, and she wanted her second husband, Giuseppe Girgenti, to be mayor like her first one. But they were defeated at the last elections, and I think they always will be, because of the guillotine affair." I started and caught my friend by the arm. He smiled. "Oh," he exclaimed, "you'd like to know the story. I hear the mayor telling it to the secretary this minute, but he doesn't know it as well as I do. You see, Captain, I was a member of the household, and I saw everything, even to the bottom of the basket." "Have a cigar, Santo?" I offered. "You've never smoked any as good as these." Pietro Santo took a cigar, and I fumed with impatience while he chatted with the man who had interrupted us. Afterwards, I suggested he come aboard my ship, for I was determined to know the rest of the story before I left Bonifacio. "And so," I began with a laugh as soon as we were installed in my cabin, "you say that woman was guillotined?" "You do wrong to laugh, sir," he replied, extremely serious. "She was guillotined, and it happened before the eyes of almost all the people you saw this evening. If you noticed, they all crossed themselves when she came into the room." I stared at him in open-eyed amazement, and he went on simply, "That's why she always wears that velvet band, to hide the scar." "Mr. Santo, you're making fun of me. I'm going to call on Angeluccia and ask her to take off the band before my eyes. I should like to see that scar." The man shook his head. "She wouldn't take it off, sir. We all know that if she did, her head would fall off." And so saying, he made the sign of the cross. I studied him by the light of the little swinging lamp, with his curly hair and slight figure. He looked like a timid angel, frightened at the sight of the devil. I could not help smiling. And yet, Antonio Macci, Angeluccia's first husband, was the best of men. He sighed. "Who would ever suspect such a thing of him? I loved him, sir. He had been very good to me. He was an antique dealer and had brought me up in his shop. He was famous all through Corsica, and known to many tourists to whom he sold souvenirs of Napoleon and the imperial family. He manufactured these curios because the rage for them was such that authentic pieces had long been sold and there were no more to be had. He made a fortune in this business, and the tourists were quite happy with their purchases, which they were firmly convinced were authentic. Antonio, however, never lost an opportunity to buy any revolutionary articles when the occasion offered. He was able to sell them at a good price to the English and Americans who never left the island without first paying him a little visit. From time to time, he made short trips to France to renew our stock, and I went with him the last time he went to Toulon. He had read in the papers that there were some very interesting pieces to be sold at auction, and he was anxious to acquire them for his shop. We made a number of purchases that day. We bought a Bastille relief for 425 francs, General Moreau's bed for 215 francs, Mirabeau's death mask for 1,000 francs, a bezel ring with some locks of Louis XVI's hair for 1,200 francs, and last, the famous guillotine, which, it seems, Samson himself, the famous executioner, had used. This cost us 921 francs, and we returned home very well pleased with ourselves and our purchases. We found Angeluccia and her cousin Giuseppe waiting for us on the dock. The deputy mayor and a delegation from the town council were also waiting for us because Antonio, though his successful business had become one of the most important men in town and had been elected mayor, he was about 40 years old at that time, and his wife 20. But this great difference in age did not keep Angeluccia from loving her husband ardently. Giuseppe, however, who was about her age, obviously adored his cousin. Anyone could see it merely by the manner in which he looked at her. But be that as it may, I must add that I, for my part, had never seen anything in the behavior of the two to justify the slightest suspicion in the husband. Angeluccia herself was too honest and too upright in her actions to give poor Giuseppe any chance to forget her marital duties, and I never believed that he would have had the daring to attempt such an enterprise. He loved Angeluccia. That was all, and my master knew it as well as the rest of us. Perfectly sure of his wife, he used to joke with her sometimes about it. Angeluccia, who was kind by nature, asked him to spare her poor cousin and not make too much fun of him because Antonio would never find his equal in imitating and redoing furniture of the Empire and Louis XVI. Giuseppe, in fact, was a real artist. Besides, he knew all of Antonio's business secrets, which was probably why the dealer tolerated a workman who looked at his wife with such eloquent eyes. Giuseppe's forlorn love made him rather melancholy, but Angeluccia was always gay. She had not yet become the funereal beauty you saw today. She laughed often and was affectionate and happy with her husband, like any good little wife who has nothing on her conscience. Our return was well celebrated. Angeluccia had prepared an excellent luncheon and had invited a few friends to share it with us. Everyone was anxious to hear of the new and sensational purchases, and everyone wanted to see them. "Does the guillotine still work?" one of the guests asked. "Would you like to try it?" the master of the house answered with a laugh. During the meal, Antonio, next to whom I was seated, accidentally dropped his napkin and bent over to pick it up, but I had already seen it slide to the floor, and my head was under the table at the same time that his was. I straightened up and returned him his napkin. Then, with a hurried excuse, I left the room, bewildered. I stumbled into the shop and sank into a chair. My discovery had momentarily stunned me, but as my wits returned to me, my first question was, had Antonio seen? No, my sudden movement and the position of my head under the table must have made that impossible. Besides, the very calmness with which he had straightened up and received the napkin from me, and the quiet way in which he had resumed conversation, should have reassured me. I returned to the dining room, where the meal was finishing gaily. The deputy mayor, who is the mayor today, was insisting on being shown the guillotine immediately. Antonio, however, answered that he must wait until the instrument of death had been put in working order. I know my Americans, he added with a laugh. They won't buy it until it works perfectly. Shortly afterwards, the guests took leave of their hosts, and during the rest of the day, I could not keep my eyes off of Angeluccia, who kissed her husband 100 times if she kissed him once during the afternoon. It made me shiver to watch her. I did not imagine that such deceit was possible in so young and apparently frank a person. You see, Captain, when I bent under the table at luncheon, I had seen Angeluccia's little foot tightly and amorously pressed between Giuseppe's. Her very movement in releasing her foot had proved the crime to me. As the days passed, life at the shop went on as usual. A few foreign customers came for the famous guillotine, but the master answered that there were still some necessary repairs, and that he would not sell it until it was in perfect working condition. In fact, we were working on it secretly in the basement and had taken it down and put it together several times. It was badly worm-eaten and out of joint, and we were trying to balance it properly so that the knife would run smoothly in its grooves. This work revolted me, but it seemed on the contrary to please Antonio. Angeluccia's birthday and the Pentecost fell on the same date, and it was customary for the mayor to give a party of some sort on the day of Pentecost. Antonio announced that he had decided to give a costume ball. This would be an excellent opportunity to show his guillotine. No one had seen it yet, and it was to be the crowning event of the evening. Bonifacio was very fond of this sort of amusement, historical reconstructions and pageants, and when Angeluccia heard the plan, she flung herself to her husband's neck like a happy child. She herself suggested that she go as Marie Antoinette. We'll make it very realistic and guillotine you at the end of the party, Antonio said with a laugh. Why not? Angeluccia answered. It would be fun. When the town knew what sort of party the mayor was planning, everyone wanted to go, and the next 15 days before Pentecost were filled with preparations. The shop was full from morning to night, with people running in and out, asking advice and studying old prints. Antonio was to represent Fouquier Tinville, the terrible public accuser. Giuseppe was to be Samson, the executioner, and I was to fill the humble role of his aide. The great day arrived. Early in the morning, we emptied the shop of all the odds and ends with which it was filled and put up the guillotine. Giuseppe had made a knife of cardboard covered with silver paper, so that Angeluccia's desire to play the guillotine scene to the end could be carried out, and we tried the machine several times to make sure it worked. We danced all afternoon, and at night there was a big ball at the town hall. Everyone drank toast after toast enthusiastically to the mayor and his beautiful wife. Angeluccia was dressed in the costume worn by Marie Antoinette during her imprisonment, and this simple dress, well in keeping with the feelings of a poor woman destined for her so tragic an end, suited her marvelously. I shall never forget the sight of Angeluccia's beautiful white neck, rising proudly from the delicately crossed kerchief, and Giuseppe devoured her with his eyes, catching the too apparent flame of desire in his look. I could not help glancing from time to time at Antonio, who seemed almost wildly gay. At the end of the dinner, it was he who gave the signal for the start of the horrible play. In a well-prepared speech, he informed the guests that he and some friends of his had planned a little surprise, which consisted in presenting to them the most tragic hours of the Revolution. Bonifacio having the great fortune of possessing a guillotine, they were going to make use of it to decapitate Marie Antoinette. At these words, the people laughed and cheered, giving a merry ovation to Angeluccia, who rose from her seat and declared that she would know how to die courageously, as befitted a queen of France. A roll of drums suddenly beat in the streets, and we ran to the windows. A miserable cart, drawn by a dilapidated horse, stood there surrounded by guards and officers of the guillotine, all wearing the bonnet of the Revolution. A group of horrible knitting women danced and sang in the streets, calling loudly for the death of the Austrian, dethroned Queen of France. One might very easily have imagined oneself back in the days of 1793. We'd all taken part in this game, without seeing any harm in it, and it wasn't until Angeluccia had stepped into the cart with her hands tied behind her back, and the procession had started to the sinister beat of her funeral drums, that more than one felt a shiver steal up his spine, and realized that such a masquerade might well touch upon sacrilege. The whole scene was horribly effective. Night had fallen, and the flickering light of the torches gave a death-like beauty to Angeluccia's face. And she played her part well, holding herself proudly erect. She seemed to be braving the populace with her cold stare, and her face, with its changeless severity of expression, might well have been carved in stone. We reached Antonio's house, and there the gay laughs broke out anew. Antonio was already in the shop, where he had seated a chosen group of people who were to watch the mock execution. The mob was thickly packed in, and everyone was in a state of extreme excitement at finally seeing the famous guillotine at such close range. My master asked for silence and began by making a little speech on the good points of his instrument of death. He mentioned all the noble necks which, he claimed, had rested on the headboards, and he ended by exhibiting the real knife which he had bought at the same time. "I had the paper knife up there made so you could see just how the thing worked," he explained. Then turning to Giuseppe, "Are you ready, Samson?" Samson replied that he was ready. "Bring forth the Austrian," Antonio ordered in a deep voice. Giuseppe and I placed Marie Antoinette, Angeluccia, on the plank, and Antonio lowered the board that held her head in position. The laughter in the room suddenly ceased, and an uneasy feeling swept over the crowd. The sight of the lovely body stretched out on the plank brought to the minds of even the hardened men present the memory of all the unfortunates who had really lain there to die. The joke had been carried too far. The merriment was revived for the moment, however, by the sight of Angeluccia's amused face as she looked here and there at the guests, while her husband finished his lecture on the machine, showing the baskets which received the body, and that into which the head fell. But suddenly, as we watched Angeluccia, an awful change came over her face. Wild terror was written there. Her eyes had widened horribly, and her mouth opened as though to let out a cry which stuck in her throat. Giuseppe was at the back and had seen nothing of this, but I, who was at the side, was struck with a nameless fear, as the others had been. We were looking at the sight of one who really knew she was going to be decapitated, The laughter had died out, and some of the people even shrank back as though struck by an invincible terror. As for me, I came closer, for I had suddenly noticed that Angeluccia's horror-stricken eyes were staring at something in the bottom of the basket, which was to receive the head. I looked into the basket, which Antonio had opened only a moment before, and I too read what Angeluccia had read. I too read the little placard fastened to the bottom. Pray to the Virgin Mary, Angeluccia, wife of Antonio, mistress of Giuseppe, for you are about to die. I uttered a hollow cry and turned like a madman to stop Giuseppe, who, at a motion from Antonio, had seized the rope. Alas, I was too late. The knife fell, and what followed was horrible. Too horrible for words. The unfortunate woman let out a scream which ended in an abrupt gurgle. A scream which will echo in my ears to my dying day. And then her blood spouted out over the audience, who let out sickening cries and made a desperate fight for the door. I fainted. You all know how much I love food. I created a whole online group dedicated to how much I love it. I talk about it in every episode. I love a good meal made with great ingredients. Sometimes, though, I have no time to, or honestly, just plain don't feel like cooking for myself. But I am very particular about quality ingredients and meals that are nutritious. That's why I'm so glad I discovered Tempo. Tempo has fast and feel-good single-serving meals that can be ready in just 3 minutes without sacrificing taste or convenience. Honestly, I didn't believe it either when I first heard about it, but I was no joke blown away by how good all these meals were. I wish I could show you my text messages when I got these to my parents, because I was just raving about all of them. Like, there was this poblano bacon chicken with this cream sauce. Oh my god, and these sweet chili meatballs. Oh, and this apricot glazed chicken. Oh my god. That wasn't even all of them, but those are my top 3. I still think about them. And each meal was so filling. That's so important to me. So, for a limited time, Tempo is offering my listeners 60% off your first box. Go to tempomeals.com/scare. That's tempomeals.com/scare for 60% off your first box. tempomeals.com/scare. Rules and restrictions may apply. Here, Pietro Santo stopped and grew so pale at the memory of the awful scene that I feared he was going to be ill. I restored some of his strength with a glass of old grappa. But in spite of all that, I said to him, Angeluccia was not killed. I saw her myself, and she certainly was alive. He sighed and lifted his head. Are you sure she really is alive? He asked. There isn't a soul in Bonifacio who passes her in the street without crossing himself, seeing her never look to the right nor to the left, always holding her head rigid. They firmly believe that her head is held to her neck by some supernatural miracle. That is how the legend of the velvet collar grew. Besides, she looked like a ghost, and when she shakes hands with me, the touch of her icy skin makes me tremble. Yes, I know, it's childish, but the whole affair was such a strange one. You must excuse the fantastic tales which our peasant folk have created. The truth of the matter is, I suppose, that Antonio planned his blow badly, and the machine was too old and did not work properly, and that Angeluccia's head was pushed too far through the opening, in such a way that the knife struck her at the rise of the shoulders. This is not the first time that such an accident has occurred with the guillotine. We have heard of cases where it took 5 tries to cut the head off. Giuseppe was the only one present when the doctor, whom he himself had fetched, saw her, and he says the wound was quite large. Everybody ran away at the time, and Antonio himself disappeared. You can see how all this helped form the legend that grew up overnight. Even those present at the time claimed that they saw Angeluccia's head actually drop into the basket. Naturally, when Angeluccia reappeared some weeks later with the velvet ribbon, imaginations ran riot. And even when I look at her, there are times when I am hypnotized by her neck and wouldn't dare, under any circumstances, untie her velvet band. And what happened to Antonio? He is dead, or at least they say. At any rate, his decease has been legally published since Giuseppe and Angeluccia are married. They found his body, half-eaten by crabs on the beach near the grottos. The corpse was completely disfigured, but they found papers on it, and the clothes were his. He probably ran away, believing Angeluccia dead, and threw himself over the cliff. He had prepared his revenge well, silently and cunningly as they do here, but I am still amazed at the skill with which he hid his feelings from the day that he first got an inkling of the truth of the relations between Angeluccia and her cousin. The police have the duplicate knife that he made, so that it would look like Giuseppe's. It is in Ajaccio. Your story isn't bad, Captain Michel conceded generously to Gobert. It has an element of horror to it. It's not finished yet, Gobert explained, asking for another few minutes of silence. Let me go on, and you will see that it really is horrible. I didn't know the end myself until some time later, on a second voyage to Bonifacio. And it was good old Pietro Santo who related the concluding details to me. Imagine my extreme amazement when, on asking him news of the woman with the velvet collar, he answered me in perfect seriousness. Captain, the legend was right after all. Angeluccia died on the day that the velvet collar was touched. What? I cried. But who undid the collar? I did. And her head fell off. While I stared at Pietro Santo, wondering if he had lost his mind, he explained to me that after I left Bonifacio, a doubt had spread through the town to the truth of Antonio's supposed death. It seemed that Ascoli, the mayor, was responsible for this and claimed to know what he was talking about. He was convinced that he had met Antonio one day when he was out hunting. The man had been almost naked, living like a wild beast. And when Ascoli tried to speak to him, he ran away. It was during this time that the elections for mayor came up again, and Giuseppe was Ascoli's rival for the post. During the entire campaign, Ascoli declared that Giuseppe was the accomplice of a bigamous woman and therefore unworthy of the position. Giuseppe's rage knew no bounds when he was defeated, and he resolved to hunt Antonio out. It took him several months to do so, but he finally accomplished his purpose. Antonio, who for 10 years had never spoken to a soul, learned that his wife was not dead as he had supposed, but was living happily with Giuseppe in the very house in which he had been mayor. and had believed himself loved by her. What happened then? Pietrosanto went into a hollow voice. Is beyond conception, and would make even the demons in hell shrink in horror. Good Lord, if I live to be 1,000... But to cut it short, sir, the story can be told in a few words. One evening, a soft, clear evening like this, I was returning from an expedition to the grottos, where I had escorted some friends and was seated in the little boat taking us back to the port when, in passing the cliffs, I heard a chant that made my blood run cold. It was the song which is always sung here by those who have some mortal affront to avenge. I lifted my head. A man stood like a statue on the edge of the rocks, which served as a sort of pedestal to him. Although he was dressed in rags, he shouldered his gun proudly, and suddenly, as the last rays of the sun caught his face and brought it into full relief, I uttered one cry. Antonio! It was he! It was he! Oh, I was sure it was he. His fatal song and exalted air convinced me that he had not returned to these parts after playing dead for 10 years without nursing some abominable purpose. Fortunately, I could reach town quicker by boat than he could on foot. There would be time to warn Giuseppe and Angeluccia. I threw myself on the oars and reached the dock in a few minutes. The first person I met was Giuseppe himself, who was on his way home from the town hall. I thanked heaven I had arrived in time and called out to him in a hurry that a terrible misfortune was about to fall, that I had seen Antonio himself, alive, and he was on his way to town. While questioning me, he fell into step beside me, and we both ran for his house at full speed and arrived there, panting. Angeluccia, we called, flinging open the door. No answer. God help us if she's gone for a walk, Giuseppe groaned desperately. We went upstairs, still calling her, and he went into one room, while I entered another, and it was there that I found her. She was seated by the window, in a large armchair, her head resting against the cushion, and she seemed to be sleeping. As she was always extremely pale, the pallor of her beautiful face did not surprise me, although it might have struck another. "Come," I cried to Giuseppe, "she is here." In the meantime, I had come closer, surprised that she did not awake. I touched her. I touched the velvet band, which came loose in my hands, and her head rolled off. I fled with my heart pounding wildly from shock and fright, but on my way I slipped and fell in a horrible pool of blood, which I had not noticed on entering because of the shadows which had darkened the room. I picked myself up with a yell and left the house madly. People ran from me in the streets as one runs from a wild beast. During the next few days, I came near to going insane. Fortunately, I completely recovered my senses, well enough, in fact, to be the present mayor of Bonifacio. As you probably understand by now, sir, I had seen Antonio as he was returning from the deed. It was easy enough to figure the whole thing out then. He had entered the house, found Angeluccia alone, and killed her with a stab to the heart. Then, his mind haunted by what Ascoli had told him, he completed the work which he had commenced so clumsily 10 years before. more certain of his Corsican dagger than of the mock historical instrument which had failed him before. He had decapitated her, and, without shrinking from the atrocity of the deed, had replaced her head on her shoulders and had tied it in position with the velvet ribbon. And now, concluded Pietro Santo, if you want news of Giuseppe, you will have to go into the wilds for it. 2 days after the murder, he disappeared into the mountains with a gun over his shoulder and Angeluccia's head, which he had embalmed himself, in a sack around his waist. Giuseppe, Ascoli, and Antonio have never been seen since, but they have probably met in the approved fashion and killed each other in some hidden corner of the woods. That, sir, is the only way in which the custom of vendetta will be done away with in this country, when everybody is dead. Thanks for listening, and thank you to my author this week, Gaston Leroux, wherever you may be. So, as you may have noticed, this story bears a striking resemblance to the very popular story, The Green Ribbon, about a little girl who always wears a green ribbon around her neck until she grows up and gets sick and tells her husband that it's time to remove her ribbon, causing her head to fall off. This has become a sort of urban legend, but it was also published in 1984 in the children's book In a Dark, Dark Room, written by Alvin Schwartz. I don't know much about whether Alvin set out to directly create a more child-friendly version of The Woman with the Velvet Collar, but the similarities are glaringly apparent. He also may have been referring to another story I'd love to read on the show, though I need to reread it to make sure it isn't too outdated, if you get my drift. And that is Washington Irving's story, The Adventure of a German Student, which has a very similar narrative. But if you go back further, Irving says he heard the tale of a woman whose head was held on by a ribbon or a collar from an Irish author named Thomas More, who then said that he heard it from an English author named Horace Smith. And by the time Irving wrote his story, Smith had actually already used the trope in one of his own stories. So I got all of this information, or a lot of it. Some of it is cobbled together by myself, but I got a lot of this information from an article by Ellen Gutowski, which I will link in the show notes. Very fascinating. It gives the whole history behind this famous folktale, I guess is what you could call it. I had no idea so many stories of the same nature were out there before I started researching Gaston Leroux. And I grew up with the green ribbon. But it turns out there are all kinds of beautiful headless women hiding in dusty, forgotten ghost stories. And here we have unearthed one more. So once again, thank you for listening, and thank you for listening to this old bag of wind talk about the history behind these fascinating old stories. It's just one of my passions, one of my loves. This weekend at Midsummer Scream, actually before I get into my little spiel, if you'd like to follow the show, you can follow it on all the socials at Scare You to Sleep. You can follow me personally at Shelby B. Novak, and you can send in a story if you'd like it to be considered for the show at scareyoutosleep@gmail.com. And if you'd like ad-free episodes, please join the Patreon, patreon.com/scareyoutosleep. And that $1 tier will be lasting only until September 1st, so grab it while you still can. Back to what I was saying. So I picked up a Phantom of the Opera poster at Midsummer Scream, an original from the Lon Chaney version of Phantom of the Opera, not the Andrew Lloyd Webber, Joel Schumacher version, which I still hold near and dear in my heart. I love that version. I know a lot of people don't, but I do. But I found this original, again, Lon Chaney version of the Phantom of the Opera poster, and I've had this Gaston Leroux book sitting on my shelf for a while. There's another story in there that a friend told me that I would really like, and I really did. I'm kind of going back and forth about whether it's too outdated to read on the show, and we'll see. I'm contemplating. There's no version of it online, and we'll see. But I decided on this one for now, and I really enjoy his stories. Again, they're hard to find in English, surprisingly. I mean, he wrote The Phantom of the Opera. You'd think that his stories would be easier to track down, especially all these smaller ghost stories, but they're really not. Hopefully that changes this year, because we are now officially in the public domain that starts in 1929, and as I said, this story in particular was published in English for the first time in 1929, which was after Monsieur Leroux had already passed on, unfortunately. He actually it's believed he probably didn't get to see the film version of The Phantom of the Opera either, because he was very ill in France when it was being filmed and when it was released. He died in 1927, and the film was released in 1925, and it was released here in America, so I'm not sure if it made it over there. So no one really knows if he got to see it, but they're pretty sure he didn't, which is kind of sad, or maybe not. Maybe he couldn't care less. I'm not sure. I didn't know him, so we'll never know. But I just find some of these older stories so fascinating, and some of these old authors, some of these long gone authors of the past, and how many of these ghost stories were forgotten. This is one reason I collect antique books, and I love them so much, is because some of these stories just never made it to the internet, because they were published maybe once in a compilation of things like Weird Tales, and they just didn't survive, but they're fantastic. I collect these paperback novels from the 50s called Pan's Book of Horror Stories, and that one, by the way, they made a more modern version, kind of compilation version, if you can find that one out there. But there are also the originals that were several volumes that came out, and I have a few of them. And some of the stories in there you simply cannot find anywhere else. They were only published once, and they were never digitized. And because some of these are from the 50s, we're very far away from getting to the public domain era of the 50s. So, we're like 20 years away from it. So a lot of them may not see the internet for a while. And I mean, it depends, but this is why I really enjoy collecting old books. And I think the written word and going outside of just the internet and what, the internet tells you about. And as much as I love YouTubers and TikTokers, there's some things there's so much to discover in the world when you just go touch things and flip through things, and especially when it comes to horror and sci-fi stories. I mean, I think about the same thing. Where are my stories going to end up one day? The stories I've written, who knows if they might be forgotten as well. And then, in 100 years, whatever the 100-year from now version of a podcast is, some woman is sitting there like, I discovered this lost media by this woman named Shelby Novak. And she had some pretty cool stories. It's so sad that they were lost, but now they're found. Anyway, I'm rambling so much. I'm actually recording the intro and outro before I record the story, which is not something I usually do, but it has been a crazy heat wave this week. Plus, Midsummer Scream was last weekend, and I had to recover. My voice was gone for a few days, and it's just this heat wave. I mean, you can even probably hear my air conditioner right now. I unfortunately don't have central air where I live. It's just this kind of raggedy old air conditioner. She gets the job done, but it's very loud, and does not kick off because it has been in triple digits all week. And so I've been trying to find time in the evenings to record, but I keep falling asleep before I can do that. So I'm recording the intro and outro first, and this is probably a day late, if I'm going to be honest with myself. And honesty is the best policy because, again, it has just been so sweltering. The air conditioner's on, and I'm still sitting here sweating because it doesn't quite reach across the room to where my desk is. Oh, manifesting a place with central AC. But, someday we'll get there. But before I go, I want to thank everyone who came out to Midsummer Scream and said hello. It meant the world to me. It meant so much to me. Thank you so much. I posted some of you on my Instagram. Thank you for asking for pictures and things. And I just can't tell you enough how much it means to me to meet you, and how it blows my mind, and it just makes me so happy. I met a few of you who had no idea what I looked like because you've only listened to the show, which has happened a couple times. It's so fun. I love it. I really love it when that happens because it makes me feel like the old days when I didn't really show my face places. And it happens a lot when one of my co-workers, I guess you could call them, will be, because we're all very good about talking about each other's shows when we're talking to the crowd of people coming through. And I'll overhear one of my co-workers be like, hey, you should listen to this show called Scare You to Sleep. And they always say the nicest things about me. And it's just I blush. I'm like, oh my God, that's so nice of you to say. They have such nice things to say about the show. But it happened probably 3 or 4 times. Someone would be like, oh yeah, I listened to that show. And they'd be like, oh, well, that's her. So that was always fun. They're like, oh, it's you. I didn't know what you looked like. And that was fun too. So I will take it anyway. And I had a blast in my panel. This is getting pretty long, so I'll keep this for a ramble on Patreon for those who want to hear all about Midsummer Scream. I'll try to do a video one because I have some video I took there too. And I will let you go. And yeah, thank you so much for listening to me talk about Gaston Leroux and women who keep their heads on with a ribbon. All right. Please drink your water, and not just water. Please get your electrolytes. I've been working on that as well while I sit here and just sweat my soul out of all of my pores. But please drink your water. Go get some sleep. Sweet dreams. I have been hearing about linen sheets for forever. So I finally made the switch with Quint, and let me tell you, I'm obsessed. Yes, it's Shelby, and these linen sheets have elevated the look of my bedroom, and I honestly don't know why I waited for so long. I'm a hot sleeper, especially now during these warmer months, and these sheets have been a game changer. Quint's sheets are light, breathable, and soft from day one, woven from 100% European flax It's the perfect mix of relaxed and refined, and it just gets softer with every wash. And linen isn't their only game. Quint's has ultra plush duvets, quilts, pillows, and shams too, featuring other premium fabrics like organic cotton, breezy bamboo, and skin-nourishing silk. My favorite part is that Quint's only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. Level up your bedding with Quint's. You'll feel the difference right away. Go to quince.com/SYTS for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/SYTS to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/SYTS.